Women with disabilities are women too.
Hi, I'm Niluka. I'm a disabled woman from Sri Lanka, and violence has very much been part of my lived experience from a very young age. When it comes to disabled women, I think firstly we need to look at microviolence, violence in terms of everyday interaction and opportunity. The fact that most disabled women in my country do not have access to education, access to employment, access to the built environment, access to opportunities that most women take for granted is in and of itself a form of exclusionary violence. Even me, coming from a rather affluent and influential family, my parents had to struggle to get me into a kindergarten because most schools, nurseries, kindergartens assumed that they will not be able to cope with the needs of a little child with a stumpy arm like this. How that is relevant is beyond my imagination, but that remains a reality for most of the disabled sisters in my country today. I work with quite a lot of disabled women, and when it comes to micro violence that I spoke about, when it comes to the lack of opportunity, it leads to dependence and institutionalization, where in the absence of education and employment, most women are confined to the care environments of their households or charitable institutions. And when it comes to charitable institutions in countries like Sri Lanka, where the regulatory framework is very weak, you have two forms of violence that women face. There is overt violence, abuse, direct violence, and then there is the indirect violence of neglect, of lack of care, of withholding love, even in family environments, where women are often seen as less than worthy of that care, where they are dehumanized, where they are devalued, and where they are not given the basic necessities that are needed. Recently, I met women at a care home, and interestingly, in many of these care homes and orphanages, as we would call it, the inmates happen to be mostly female, the unwanteds, even among the disabled population in countries like Sri Lanka, and I would say in many countries around the world. One of the reasons I feel is that there's an almost intolerance of the disabled female, an ontological abhorrence of the disabled woman. Her very existence is so threatening that female infanticide, feticide, when it comes to disabled female fetuses, is at a very high rate in our region, in my country included. I know people in my own family had to face those challenges, had to make tough choices along those lines because of the fear of the disabled female fetus. So, given that the existence of the disabled woman in itself is not tolerated, the propensity for violence towards that disabled woman, like me, is extremely high in society in general. And then we have violence which is of a sexual nature. I myself have experienced rape, sexual assault, workplace violence of a sexual nature. All of these, and I do believe that underlying those attacks, those forms of aggression, is an assumption of perceived vulnerability of me as a disabled woman. And that is the thing, when it comes to a lot of disabled women who are either excluded from participatory spaces and opportunities, who are put in care homes and subject to neglect, who are eliminated, aborted, who are raped, there's an assumption of vulnerability when it comes to disability. And I think a lot of people fear disabled women. They fear disability because it reminds them of their own fragility, of their own vulnerability, and their own potential dependency. And when you are encountered with a disabled woman, that becomes a double whammy. I do sincerely feel that a lot of the violence directed towards women, especially disabled women, comes from a place of that sense of insecurity and fear, where one's power, authority, and sense of security is exerted through violence, be it sexual, be it institutional, be it exclusionary. And that does not have to be a sad thing. Because you know what? I am a fighter. I would not be making this video if I had just lain around being vulnerable and thinking, that's it. That is the destiny of a disabled woman. No. If one is violent towards you and one is fearful of you, that means you are scary. Us women, in our perceived fragility, in our perceived vulnerability, are frightening, are scary. And perhaps that is rather radical, but that has been my mantra to life. If you are scary, be scary. Make that beautiful vulnerability a point of strength and unity for us as sisters, as women, and not a point of weakness and disunity. Together, we can be beautifully vulnerable. And to do that, we must speak up. We must bring that violence out of the shadows. Because for many years after being raped, I could not speak. I could not speak because I assumed that I had done something wrong. Because I assumed that already as a disabled woman, I was unmarriageable. And now in a society where chastity, where virginity is a prerequisite for marriage, my devalued status is now of no value whatsoever. I feared for the virtue and honor of my parents, and I did not speak up. Because I thought that me, the worthless disabled woman, the 19-year-old that I was now completely worthless when it came to sexuality, when it came to marriage prospects. And now many years later, I look back at it and think, what BS. Violence thrives in the shadows. Violence thrives in silence and in darkness. And when brought to light, that violence, which truly is fear, loses all power and loses all momentum. So let us speak up against violence. Let us be proudly vulnerable.
Say no to violence.
By Rising Flame, Facebook and Twitter @Rising Flame Now. To join the South Asia Network of Women with Disabilities, send us an email at nidhi@risingflame.org.